This is the Chassidic Story Project with Barak Hullman, podcasting from Jerusalem, Israel. This podcast is sponsored by listeners just like you. To become a supporter of this podcast, please go to HasidicStory.com, HASIDIC story.com. You'll never know, you'll never know, you'll never know, you'll never know. Everybody knows the Heilige Rebbe, the Kotzker Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, was so holy that he could force you to break through to the deepest depths of your soul. If you wanted to become a Kotzker Chassid, it wasn't enough for you to just go to the mikveh. You had to mamish wash out your soul 4 times a day. Because the Kotzker said, it's better a sinner who's honest with himself than a fake holy person. Or as the Heilige Baal Shem Tov taught us, better a Rasha that knows he's a Rasha than a Tzaddik who knows that he's a Tzaddik. Better an evil person that knows that he's evil than a righteous person who knows that he's righteous. One of the highest Kotzker Chassidim was the holy Rabbi Yechiel Gastanina. Once when someone asked him how he became a Kotzker Chassid, the Gastanina told him the story. I got married at 14 years old, and one of my father-in-law's gifts to me was a talit and a pair of tefillin written especially for me. I was so touched by the gifts that he gave me that I swore to myself that I would only have the purest, holiest thoughts whenever I put on my talit and tefillin. In those days, I used to sit all day in the Beit Midrash learning. I'd wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, go to shul, learn for a few hours, pray, and then go back and study again. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I would have studied already for 8 hours. Early one afternoon, I'm sitting in the Beit Midrash, and a Yiddish walks in. He had mamish chutzpah about him, and I knew anybody who's got this kind of chutzpah, he must be a Kotzker Chassid. This Yiddish walks straight over to me and says to me, "Young man, can you loan me your talit and tefillin? I haven't prayed yet today." I thought to myself, it's 2 in the afternoon, and he hasn't prayed yet? What kind of chassid is this? So I told him straight to his face, look, I'm only 14 years old, and I've already davened twice today, and I've studied for 8 hours. What were you doing that you haven't davened yet? Brother, he said, I don't need your advice. Either give me your tallis and tefillin, or you don't. The fact is that when somebody asks to borrow your tallis or your tefillin, the halacha is that you have to give it to him. But the Gastanina said I was very hesitant, because I'd never lent it to anyone before. And I had made this promise to myself that I would only have the holiest thoughts when I wore them. So I looked at this chassid and I said to him, listen, my talit and my tefillin are very precious to me. So please guard them very carefully, because I took an oath that I would only have the holiest thoughts when I wore them. Oy, did he look at me. Then maybe I should ask someone else. No, here you go. Take my tallis and tefillin. So I figured, someone who starts davening at 2 in the afternoon is going to daven like crazy, right? And what did I hear from this Kotzker Chassid? I expected there to be like an atomic explosion, praying like I'd never seen in my life. But he put on the tallis and tefillin, and he walked over to the large bay window and stared down at the marketplace, just watching the people walking below. I thought to myself, what a chilul Hashem! What a desecration of God's name. You just stand at the window and look at the square, and for that he's got my tallis and tefillin. Who knows what kind of thoughts are running through his head? And it took all of my self-control not to run over and just rip off my tallis and tefillin from him. The Kotzker Chassid, he stood at the window for at least an hour without praying at all. And then, all of a sudden, he turns around, runs to the Holy Ark, throws his face into the curtain. And finally, I said to myself, okay, now he's going to daven. And he holds his face between the curtains of the Holy Ark. And exactly 4 minutes by the clock, he was finished. That was just too much for me. The Kotzker Chassid spends an hour in my tallis and tefillin just staring out the window. God only knows what thoughts he had. And then 4 minutes davening with his head in the curtains of the Aron Kodesh. I ran over to him and I tore off my tallis. Both my tallis and the curtain were wet, completely soaked with his tears. Gewalt, was I ashamed of myself. Please forgive me, I cried. I didn't know you were praying like this. I thought you were just looking out the window. Come, said the man. Let me show you something. And he led me to the window. Together we looked down at the market square, where there were a group of Cossacks doing their basic training. This Yiddish, this Kotzker Chassid, he says to me, take a look at those 10 little Cossacks. The officer orders them, go left, right, and they do exactly what he says. Young man, do you know what a Cossack is? He's a little drunkard. And his officer? He's an even bigger drunkard. If the officer tells him to go right, he'll get wounded 50,000 times before he goes left. The general, who's an even bigger drunkard than all the Cossacks put together, told him to go right, he'd get killed in action before he goes left. And if the Tsar of Russia told the Cossack to go right, he would commit suicide right there before going left. Isn't it so? And I had to agree. So I thought to myself as I watched his Cossacks, how is it that I stood on Mount Sinai and heard God telling me to go right, but I'm still going left? With that thought in my heart, I began to daven. As the Chassid finished explaining how he davens to me, he noticed how I clutched my Tallis to my heart and that I seemed very upset. Don't worry, he said to me. Your Tallis will dry by tomorrow. But at that moment I couldn't control myself anymore. I started crying from the deepest places of my heart. No, you don't understand. I don't want my Tallis to ever be dry again. The Chassid put his arm around me. He said, so you want to learn how to really daven? Then pack up fast and come with me. We're going to the Kotzker Rebbe.